For the love of God and the heart of a woman. Chapter 7. The harp music was still playing. Alicia was breathless. Shane appeared breathless too. They looked at each other. Alicia never knew that she could see so much of a man's life in a simple kiss. She felt closer to him now. You saw me when I received that call to go on a mission to Earth, Shane said slowly. What you saw, I could see too, he said. The old man is my grandfather. He was the one who delivered the message to me in a parchment. I have been sent on several missions since, but that one was a dangerous one. Even now, I remember the effects of it. But I was promised that I would return safe and intact. The dark passage that you saw is the cave of the dark forces. I was physically trapped in there while I was learning about the dark forces. No one could get to me for days. I had to rely on my mental energies and godly powers I learned to keep those dark forces from overcoming my soul. I finally got out, though. My father, along with some others, came and rescued me. With a combination of their powers, they got me out. I had to rest for several days because of the exhaustion, but I was well otherwise. Shane came closer again and put his hand on her waist. He asked softly, "Will you let me know your answer soon?" His voice was so soft that it sent chills up and down her body. "Yes," she said, "I will let you know soon," Alicia said. He kissed her again, softly this time, then said, "Let's go out to the garden." He spun her around, grabbed her arm, and strode quickly out of the room with her following him. They went downstairs and outside to the garden. The garden was beautiful. It was planted with all types of flowers and trees. The trees gave shade to small benches beneath them. Flowers lined the benches in front and behind them. "I sometimes come here to relax," Shane said, "to free my mind of the troubles of the day," he said. He was still holding her hand. "All these trees were planted long ago. They have been here ever since I can remember. They were here before the house was built." He sat on one of the benches and gently pulled her down with him. "I know that you do not know much about my family background and my life here, but we can start somewhere. I came from another world similar to yours, but I was young when I left. I was in my late teens. In that world, we spoke a different language. I can still remember the tongue. That is the reason I speak with a slight accent. I came here because of a hunting accident. My father, two of my friends, and I were hunting rabbits. I went crashing through the forest, chasing a couple of rabbits. One ran near a cliff, and before I could stop myself, I went over the cliff. The cliff was not so high, but there were rocks beneath. I hit my head on a rock and passed out. When I was found, I was in a coma for days. My father and my friends took me back to the house and laid me on a bed. In my world, old stories were written of a place where immortals lived and exquisite happiness exists. It was written about in the old edicts of my world. My father thought that if I were to go, he would want me to go there. So he consulted wise men in our district on how to get there. The wise men told him of a group of strangely dressed men who occasionally visited our world and who possessed strange but godly powers. My father inquired of these wise men, where and when do these men appear? The wise men replied that they have been seen at summer's end. My father requested that the wise men arranged a meeting with these strangely dressed men. It was almost summer's end, so I did not have long to wait. Sure enough, when summer's end came, these men appeared. They were led to my house. The strange men told my father that I will arise from the coma and will live. But the choice is his, whether I will live in my world or their world. The men told my father that their world is filled with many capabilities, tasks, and progression, which I can quickly learn. I will benefit from learning the powers that govern that world, and benefit from others who will receive assistance from me. My father thought that I would be better off living in that world, and so it was decided. The men took me with them and left my world. I woke up to find myself in this world. Everything was explained to me concerning the conversation on the night of my departure. I was surprised to discover that my grandfather was already living here. My father followed afterwards until my whole family came here to live. Thankfully, they kept in contact with these men, who told them how I was getting on in their world. My family did not die before they got here. They were changed from mortal to immortal in a twinkling. They were all good people. They were all very good people. In my family, we were taught with the highest standing. We had a faithful sense of good and evil. We were taught to shun and embrace the good. We are from a line of noble men who, long ago, fought against evil to maintain good. We were taught never to flinch when darkness appears, and that we keep our hearts true to light and truth. I was not surprised that our family was chosen to come here. We have been happy here ever since we came. All my brothers and I have since gone on missions back to my world and to yours for the Holy One. We take these missions seriously, since they involve lives on earth, as well as the putting down of evil. Shane focused his gaze on Alicia intently. I have always seen the good in you, Alicia. Your heart speaks more to me than you can tell, and I can feel your heart. Your heart never lies. Your heart speaks from the depths of your soul. My heart wants the same thing your heart does, each other. I have searched long and hard for the right woman for me. It was not an easy task. I have met all kinds of women, but dated only a few. But none have come close to a pure heart as yours. Only a true and pure heart can withstand the rigors of my life. Upon my honor, I will be true to you. You will never miss a day without loving me for who I am and the husband I will be to you, he said coquettely, and smiled. I will be bound to you as you will be bound to me by my love for you. Shane's words stirred within her a desire for him. She remembered the words, bound to you. She remembered the last time she had read those words. The phrase came to her again. A husband must use these powers to please his wife in a way that will bind her to him forever. The book on her bookshelf at home in her little study. The words of the book on how to love God, how to love in a godlike way, came back to her. A husband must learn to forget himself and be willing to sacrifice everything for his wife, not forgetting his obligations to eternal laws. Alicia suddenly turned to Shane and placed her hand upon his cheek and asked, "Are you willing to sacrifice everything for me?" she asked, questioningly, in a surprised voice. "Everything," replied Shane. "Of course, I am bound by eternal laws to always eschew evil and embrace good, but nothing will come in the way between us. Nothing." He placed his hand upon her hand and caressed them gently. He was thoughtful for a moment. Alicia also was left to her own thoughts. "I do not know why should one give so much?" Alicia asked after a while. "When you come to know the strength of the power of good, you will feel the need to give more and more of yourself. You will get used to it after a while. You will find that the more you give, the more you will receive strength from that almighty source that is true, and which represents all that is good. You go about the day feeling energized and satisfied. What is even more glorious is when you receive from the one you love the unconditional love you gave. It is a wonderful feeling." Shane folded his arms and looked at Alicia. Her brown eyes looked alive with excitement as she received this new information. He watched her closely, taking in every part of her shape. She was average height, about 5 feet 6 inches. She was neither skinny nor stocky. He surmised that she weighed about 150 pounds. She had ample breasts and hips, with a small waist, just the way he liked. Alicia felt his scrutiny and began to scrutinize him too, shyly. He had not aged at all. He looked comfortable, seated with his arms folded. His face was at rest, with a little twinkling in his eyes. He felt her scrutiny too. He does not have an inch of fat on his body. His arms were slightly muscular, including his thighs and legs, which gives his large stature an athletic look. His eyes rested on her mouth, then took in the shape of her breast and her small waist. He suddenly got up. "We cannot sit here watching each other," he said gruffly. He reached out and took her hand. Alicia clasped her hand into his. "Anyway, it's almost time for lunch," he surmised. He made his way with her back to the house. "My uncle is joining us for lunch today. He will get to meet you," Shane said over his shoulder. When they got back inside the house, Shane headed for the dining room. This house is called the Bradenberry House, from back in the old days. The Bradenberry family, which is my family's last name, made sure it was built to comfort. My grandfather made sure of that. So instead of having to go back to your room to wash up, a washroom was built near the dining room so that he can quickly wash and go and have dinner or lunch, Shane said. Her hand was still in his. He led her to the washroom and inside. It was a small room with bathroom amenities, but it was big enough to fit a large man. Alicia washed her hands and her face while Shane talked. Yuri should be coming around with Paris strings any moment now, he said. Alicia was done. Shane washed his hands and face and dried them. He took Alicia's hand again and walked into the living room. Paris Strings was already there. She was seated and was in conversation with a distinguished-looking gentleman. They were laughing about some joke that Shane and Alicia did not hear. Yuri was seated there too. He was seated opposite to Paris Strings, while the gentleman was seated at the head of the table. Shane motioned to Alicia to take a seat beside Yuri. Shane himself sat opposite to Alicia and beside Paris Strings. Good day to you, Uncle, said Shane cheerfully. I give you Alicia Steers. She's a friend of mine. We have been friends for a long time, Shane said, looking at Alicia and smiling. Shane's uncle stood up and came around the side and grabbed Alicia's hand with both hands. Welcome to Bradenberry House, he said with a distinguished air. He had dark hair and a cheery face. He had blue eyes like Shane's. I have heard much about you, he said. Shane could not stop talking about you. From the minute you arrived in this world, he has been antsy about seeing you again, his uncle said. Oh, uncle, do not reveal so much, insisted Shane, laughing. Well, I am his Uncle Thomas, and he often speaks his thoughts with me, Uncle Thomas declared. Uncle Thomas went back to the head of the table and sat down. A middle-aged woman proceeded to serve the meal. Fruits were served along with some round, curly-looking meat. Alicia ate the fruits. Some of the fruits were the same she had at home in her room in Goulburn Castle. They were delicious. However, she hesitated at eating the round, curly-looking meat. She touched it with her fork. She was not sure about eating it. She did not recognize the meat. It is a fish, a water creature that is found along the coastline here, said Shane, seeing her puzzled face. It is quite good. If you try it, you will find that it tastes quite delicious, he added. Alicia took off a piece of it and put it in her mouth. She slowly chewed on it. The taste was good. It had a tangy, sweetish taste, as if it was marinated in some type of sauce. Alicia nodded her head and said in surprise, It is quite good. I would like to have some more. Hearing Alicia's request, Shane waved the middle-aged woman over, and she piled more of the round, curly fish on Alicia's plate. So, Uncle, how is your work with the council these days? Inquired Shane. Blessed, Uncle Thomas said. There are a number of things going on. We are getting ready to rededicate another place to test godly powers. You may have heard of that from the previous council meeting. he said. I was not in attendance, Shane said. I had a previous business engagement I had to attend to. It came up just before the council meeting started, he said. Sort of an emergency that had to be dealt with, he added. Shane was quiet about the matter. His uncle noticed his unwillingness to discuss the subject, but asked anyway. What was it about? Inquired Uncle Thomas. It is Sir Rouge. Something about his son Akram, said Shane, still unwilling to discuss the subject, but he carried on. He failed the test of the dark forces and fell into a bad situation, Shane said at last, but sent a warning look at Uncle Thomas. Shane then looked across at Alicia. Alicia, unaware of the import of the discussion, did not put in much attention to the conversation. His uncle caught the warning. Then he said carefully, "What is the bad situation?" His uncle asked slowly. "He fell into Ramron's hands," said Shane in a hushed voice. His uncle sat still. "How are they going to get him out?" his uncle inquired immediately. "They do not know as yet," Shane answered, "but he has not lost his will to be good. We can tell from his memory box being still alive," stated Shane solemnly. Alicia was suddenly attuned to the discussion. She remembered the old man from the council meeting. She also remembered him meeting Shane outside the council meeting building. The two were in deep discussion shortly before Shane looked up and saw her. Something happened to this man's son. It appears to be something serious, or Shane would not have sounded so concerned. Ramron. Who was that? Thought Alicia. She opened her mouth to ask the question when Shane, who was watching her, stopped her with a look in his eyes. "Do not ask," she heard a voice in her head said. Shane's lips moved softly. Her mouth stood open for a while, then closed as she felt the strength of his gaze, warning her. Shane can startle her so easily with his gift of telepathy. She almost forgot that he possessed it. He must have heard her thoughts. He must not have heard much of them, though. Perhaps only about her desire to ask who was Ramron. Alicia continued eating, looking from Shane to Uncle Thomas. Paris Strings was listening too and eating. "How old is he?" asked Uncle Thomas as he continued the discussion. "Sir Rouge's son? He's about my age," said Yuri. "I have met him often enough to know that he is a strong person. He will survive it," declared Yuri, with a mouthful of food. "Well, we will see," said Shane. "Well, we are all looking forward to the dance this evening," Shane said, changing the subject. "You will get to meet most of my family. All my 5 brothers and my only sister will be here. My father and mother will be here also. The dance starts at sunset," Shane said cheerily. Lunch was finished, and the middle-aged woman busied herself clearing the table. Shane got up, and also Uncle Thomas. Uncle Thomas declared that he had some research that he needs to do. Paris Strings excused herself, saying that she needs to get back to her room. "I need to get back to my room too," Alicia said. "I will take you back," volunteered Shane. "No, there is no need for you to do that," declared Alicia. I can make my way back, she said confidently. But I would love to escort you back, countered Shane. You never know what can happen between here and your room, he said teasingly. He grinned as he said this. Okay, said Alicia, smiling as she relented. Shane took her hand in his once again and led her off to her room. Uncle Thomas looked at the two of them and shook his head. Young love, he declared with a gusto. End of chapter 7. For the love of God and the heart of a woman, chapter 7. The harp music was still playing. Alicia was breathless. Shane appeared breathless too. They looked at each other. Alicia never knew that she could see so much of a man's life in a simple kiss. She felt closer to him now. You saw me when I received that call to go on a mission to Earth, Shane said slowly. What you saw, I could see too, he said. The old man is my grandfather. He was the one who delivered the message to me in a parchment. I have been sent on several missions since, but that one was a dangerous one. Even now, I remember the effects of it, but I was promised that I would return safe and intact. The dark passage that you saw is the cave of the dark forces. I was physically trapped in there while I was learning about the dark forces. No one could get to me for days. I had to rely on my mental energies and godly powers I learned to keep those dark forces from overcoming my soul. I finally got out, though. My father, along with some others, came and rescued me. With a combination of their powers, they got me out. I had to rest for several days because of the exhaustion, but I was well otherwise. Shane came closer again and put his hand on her waist. He asked softly, will you let me know your answer soon? His voice was so soft that it sent chills up and down her body. Yes, she said. I will let you know soon, Alicia said. He kissed her again.